Welcome back to the Stone Island podcast. I'm Archie Mayer, founder of Archomare, where I work as a Stone Island archivist and creative consultant. Each episode, I interview the most inspiring voices from the Stone Island universe, fellow enthusiasts and friends who drive culture through their creative obsessions. This time, we're deep in the English countryside in a very special place. Stone Island's story has been shaped in part by the creatives who come into its orbit, and my guests on this episode are a testament to that. As the founders of ID magazine, one of the most influential and culturally explosive publications to emerge during the 1980s, they were at the very forefront of showing that culture doesn't trickle down from above, it bubbles up from the street. They've nurtured an entire generation of talent, from stylists to designers to photographers and editors. They've worked with Madonna, Alexander McQueen, Jürgen Teller, Raf Simons, Helmut Lang, David Sims. The list is endless. They were honoured with the prestigious Outstanding Achievement Award in 2013 by the British Fashion Council and continue to push the boundaries of creativity to this day. With a now world-famous wink, they celebrate self-expression in its truest form. They're soulmates, business partners, and creative collaborators. I'm really pleased to welcome Terry and Trisha Jones. Cool. So, guys, before we really get stuck in, can you quickly tell us where we are?
Well, this is our studio. It's an old grain store and in a farm in Seals.
Amazing.
And we got lucky to find it before it had been converted into offices.
Incredible.
So we brought all of our stuff here into the West Country.
Fantastic.
It's 10 minutes from the barn where we live, so it's really, really amazing.
Nice.
And we have very wonderful landlord, Charles Spencer, who's doesn't mind us sort of turning it into something kind of crazy.
Before we sat down, you've kind of been taking me through the many magazines, the many collages. It's kind of an unbelievable space. It's actually quite overwhelming walking in and seeing how much stuff there is here. So you've been in this space for the last 4
years?
Five,
Four. We've only been here 5, and he hadn't.
Sure.
He was still building
in 2019.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's 6 years.
Wow, 6 years. Okay.
But anyway, he
4 years here,
Yeah.
5. Yeah.
Yeah.
About. We're not very good on time.
and then we shipped stuff.
Because everything was in
From-
upstate New York before.
Not everything. No, a lot of his stuff had been kept in storage.
Okay.
At Stratford-on-Avon.
Okay.
And some in Wales. And when it arrived, I had no idea how much stuff, because it had been put in storage by Neil, who'd done all our exhibitions.
And this is how many years of work? This is from the set. This is from
really from
60
60s,
years
yeah.
of his 60
Yeah,
years.
I kept my student work as well.
I think that's so impressive, Terry, that you've kept everything.
Yeah.
And
He
that's
doesn't throw
remarkable.
things away.
I can't stand landfill.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to make a magazine that wasn't landfill.
Well, there you go. It's a great mindset to have. This is what I wanted to not present to you guys, because obviously it's your magazine, but this was my first interaction with ID when I was 15 or 16 in a history of art lesson. My teacher, I can't remember what the exact lesson was about, but I think she was just talking about iconic magazines. And I just remember the cover being super iconic. Obviously, it's shot by Craig McDean. But we didn't actually, I can't even remember looking inside it. And then I bought this copy maybe 10 years ago when, I started delving into loads of different magazines, looking basically for Stone Island references and trying to find old, Stone Island adverts from the 80s, 90s, or 2000s. But then I realized it's probably one of the most unbelievable issues in my opinion, because it's the elevator issue.
Yeah.
Where
I love that issue. I loved it.
So the brief was everything editorial content-wise has to be shot
in an elevator.
Love it. So good. It's so good.
But also the idea was, whether it's a single shot or a double page, people had to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
And they did. The one with Lee McQueen.
Yeah.
And I think it's Katie England in a lift.
So many good shots. I mean, there's
with a horse.
There's the tricky photo, which I think is shot in Portobello Hotel or something. And then this is by your daughter Kate, isn't it? Which I love as well.
Great story where she organised getting a lift into her location.
Where is this? Just a beach somewhere?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Anyway, I thought that was that really, I don't know, captured me in that some sort of way. And I just think the fact you can have a whole magazine purely about
can I say
elevators
Terry
and lifts.
Often, I would hear Terry briefing somebody, and he would brief them, and I'd think, you're crackers. He'll never be able to do that. That's not fair. Yeah. The classic one was the one of the girls swimming.
Solveig
Sundsbo. Often I wasn't there. We happened to be in the same office at the room at the same time, and you tell the story, but basically I remember hearing you, and you put the phone down, and I said, how on earth do you expect him to get that together? And Solveig came up with something that was actually better, even better than what Terry,
they're doing, being asked to curate a fashion and cinema exhibition, it was part of a Biennale in Florence.
Fantastic.
And so I was choosing 22 avant-garde designers. And I wanted to make a flip book for each designer. And so I said to Solveig, this is the idea of... it was Lee McQueen, because it was for Lee McQueen. So Lee said that he would only be part of the exhibition if the set designers, which was a famous set designer... from Rome, could produce a tube that was from the length of here to there.
Lee drew it on a napkin.
We were having lunch with Lee, and he sketched it, and he said, if they could produce this, he would join. But Trish was very persuasive in getting him to come on board, because he really wasn't going to come on board.
Yeah. I think he'd done something with the Biennale before.
And he wasn't happy.
He wasn't very happy. So when we really wanted him to be there, and when Terry, literally, he did honestly just draw it on a piece of paper there and
make it happen. Basically.
Well, they made that happen, but I then asked Solveig to do the picture. He found the British synchro swimmers.
Because it had to be in water. That's what he wanted.
He found a tank that they did the James Bond underwater sequences in Pinewood. And the second, the first girl couldn't actually do a continuous swim. Do it. But the second one, and the film of it is absolutely brilliant.
But Lee's thing was, I want it shot underwater, and this dress kind of over the few weeks kind of disintegrated almost. You know what I mean?
We did actually very quickly.
Yeah. So, but that was Lee's idea, and Terry then translated it for Solveig. And when I heard this sort of, this suggestion or this brief, I was like, you're crackers. He put the phone down. I'm like, you're crackers. How on earth can he do it? And he did it even better. Incredible. It was amazing.
And in terms of, because obviously, so this is 1999, in terms of what the very first copy of ID looked like, can you kind of go into some detail about what because wasn't it stapled, ultimately, was it a pulp fanzine to start off?
At the point where I wanted to put a magazine together, I tried to persuade a Italian publisher to do a magazine on street style, and I was working with friends who had met during the punk book. So Alex McDowell, who's worked in movies, and he sort of came on board as one of the art people, and then Steve Johnson was a photographer I'd commissioned to do punk photos.
And that was on the King. Was that on the King's
Road? That was in '76.
Incredible.
And so that was kind of the head to toe concept, which we'd started doing in Vogue. Terence Donovan and Toscani were kind of like stopping doing the Avid and Hop and all that kind of stuff. So it was really straight head to toe photography, and we called it the Straight Up. And then I couldn't wait for the Italians, so I got a name from Caroline Baker, who knew Jolly, who had a fanzine printing press in Portobello Road. And it was only an A4 little printer. They used to do the badges, and persuaded the printers to do a 2-colour cover. They'd never done 2-colour before.
Which was pink and black.
Pink, and generally off register. And that was the start.
And it was stapled, right? Because I remember I read some stories about people not wanting to because they cut their fingers on the stable. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but
because the distributor was Perry Haynes, who was out there. Had a friend, Malcolm Garrett, had a van. So, and then James Palmer was another photographer. He had a VW camper van, and they used to drive to where we would find places that would take it.
And the top floor of our house.
Yeah, so
yes, of course. Yeah. So that's West Hampstead.
Yeah. Okay. But Terry used to say right at the beginning, this will be a collector's item one day. And I was like, oh, shut up. In your dreams.
And look at us now.
I know.
Incredible.
There you go.
And did you, I mean, what was that reaction? How did people react to that first issue that you put out?
Well, it was kind of niche audience because it was people who, were recognizing themselves.
Sure.
So it was, the journalism was down to a Q&A, and I think that it was very much a breakout of what was happening on normal fashion magazines. In fact, we called it fashion magazine.
But the other thing was, and we didn't know this, but the Face and Blitz all started around the same time.
Yeah,
and we didn't know, and that was what was so weird. Terry had wanted to do it, and he's never done things because other people are doing them. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Absolutely not. And then it was only afterwards that we realised that all three magazines had actually started in the same year, in 1980. It was just...
Unbelievable.
It was just...
So is that... and I presume that's a comment on what was happening. That was a reflection on what was happening at the time? And was that like this idea of, obviously, punk and rebellion? Was that why it was 1980?
It had moved on, because by
1980...
you were getting the sort of two-tone and
sure.
and I tried to kind of interest the Italians in that, but they just saw there was no money in street style, and the idea also was that the breadth of the street, which is why the landscape format. But the newsstands couldn't stand the landscape format.
I promise you faithfully that nobody ever talked about street style until Terry said, I want to photograph people on the street. And years later, I had a conversation, I think it was with Susie Menkes, who I adore.
Oh, she's incredible.
And this was a couple of years later, and she was saying, oh, I'm doing something about street style. And, and I said, well, you know that it was Terry's idea. And I don't even know if she did know. Do you know what I mean? It was one of those weird things. It became... it just wasn't something that people talked about then. And
completely right.
He has a lot to answer for, I'm sorry.
Well, it was more encouraging. Al and Perry, they were 10 years younger. So it was very much about encouraging people to do something which, they felt part of.
And but so you, I mean, Trish, you say Terry said it was going to be a collector's item. Did you created it whilst you were working for Ferrucci and other brands, right? So it wasn't like at that time, and for a number of years, it was a passion project.
Well, for at least 15 years, 18 years, I think it was.
Long time.
We remortgaged the house. We got partnership with Tony Elliott.
That's what saved
after 5 years.
That was Tony Elliott.
Ferrucci was a big saviour in '83,
right?
Where he said he'd take copies for a year, and we were doing quarterlies by then. So, and I think that. It was financed by doing commercial work. And Elio was a main client, and then I went on to work for other people.
Incredible. Obviously, that early work, or the start of ID, how did that differ from the work that you were doing at Vogue throughout the 70s, I presume?
Well, yeah, I mean...
72 to 77.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'd been doing Vanity Fair before that.
Sure.
And so I was used to work... I mean... I wasn't used to it. I was learning on the job, working with really, really top photographers. So
Who were some of those photographers?
Well, Frank Horvath was a big mentor and learned a ton from him. But then that was Vanity Fair. Toscani, he did menswear at Vanity Fair. But then when I went to Vogue, Bailey was the one, David Bailey was the kind of like a big brother. And and at the point where we could realise we could have fun, like the Angelica Houston, Manolo Blahnik cover broke rules. It was a full length, not looking into camera. And that was in 74. So but the ones I'd tried to do before that, like profile covers and stuff like that, were harder. I was having to sort of like break down the perceived rules that you had to do for covers.
Because we were talking about earlier, but one of my favourite covers you showed me is the Jelly cover, shot by Willie Christie.
Willie Christie,
is that right?
Yeah.
And
Willie,
the colours are so
Willie and Grace
gorgeous in
Coddington were married at the time, so they tend to kind of was shooting all of her stories, and it was the Vogue did colour promotions, so that month green was the colour.
Oh, interesting.
And then, funny enough, we met Barbara Daly, the makeup artist, at Chelsea Flower Show this year.
Extraordinary.
There was a
this year?
Complete chance.
Yeah.
After all those years?
Complete
Well, I hadn't
chance.
seen her
good.
since the 70s, and I wouldn't have recognised her either. But she got introduced to us, and then we talked about that story.
Incredible. What was the reaction or the feedback when you released the cover like that?
Well,
was it, this is so risky? Was there that inner conversation of...
The big thing was that at the point we knew it was risky, we had to clear it, not just... I got Be on board with Grace help, and then the distribution manager was totally against it. American Vogue were going through difficulties where my predecessor, Barney One, used to have to get everything approved by America,
right.
Alex Lieberman. I never had to get anything approved other than if I got Be on board, that was great. But we did run it past the managing director who had just started, come in from Australia, a guy called Bernie Laser. And then it was on press when the European, his boss in Europe, saw it and said, "Get it, that is not a Vogue cover." But it was already on press.
Yeah.
They wanted to stop the press.
it. Yeah, tried to stop the press. And then it went out, and it became like
one of the most iconic. Yeah, exactly. Unbelievable. And I want to maybe delve into a slight love story of when you two first met. I'm very intrigued.
Tee-hee.
Was it school? Was it art college?
I was at Teacher Training College. Terry was at in West of England, Bristol.
In Bristol, okay.
And there was a Georgie Fame dance at the Union. And we used to go sometimes, but we'd kind of given up going because the boys were kind of boring. And then Georgie Fame was playing, and I spoke to a friend of mine, or I don't know whose suggestion it was, but we decided that we were going to go to this particular one because of Georgie Fame. And I remember my famous phrase was strictly not on the pickup. I didn't want to meet anybody. I was on the rebound from something else.
And this man waltzes in.
And this man asked me to dance, and...
which is a rare thing.
And, and honestly, truthfully, we went back to his flat afterwards and we talked for 4 hours. And I just... I really didn't want to get involved with anybody. And... but I came back and I thought, well, he's really lovely, and but he's too short, or I'm too tall, and because all my boyfriends before that had been taller, and so he was my best friend for a year, and then once I came back from a holiday in Greece about a year later, and I was tanned and brown, and it was his birthday party, and he told me he loved me, and I was like, no, I'm sorry, that's really not good. You can't. You're my BF. You're my best friend.
How old were you guys at the time?
I was 19. I was 19. What, darling?
It was my 21st birthday.
It was. So I was 19 at the time.
That's similar to my parents have been together since they were 18 or 19.
Yeah,
I met like at a school dance of some sort. That's incredible.
So I stopped seeing him for a month because I was so scared about I'm going to lose my best friend and blah, blah, blah. Sure. And I'd gone out with other people in the meantime, and so had he. And then, hey-ho.
Yeah. So I guess you were with Terry when he had started at Vogue and then obviously
Absolutely.
onto IB.
He was still at art college when I met him.
And you were teaching at the time?
When we first met, I was at Teacher Training College.
Okay.
And then you went up to London.
I worked in the design
studio. In London, and I was still in my last year at Bristol.
Got you.
And we'd kind of decided we were going to get married. Mm-hmm. And my dad said, because my family's Jewish, Terry's not. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not religious at all. But,
sure.
And I was the eldest of all the grandchildren, and my dad said, well, I really like him, but actually I'm not going to give you permission to get married until you're 21. Mm. So I was 21 in June, and that was 68. So we'd been living together a year before that. Yeah. And Daddy said, when you're 21, so we got married in July.
Incredible.
So okay. I was 21 and you were 23 or whatever.
And then in terms of actually working, when ID started kind of, gaining notoriety, when did you what was your role in those early years, Trish?
I used to cook for people. So people would come round and, I mean, basically we didn't pay anybody.
It was
so
in the
people
house.
like Robin Derrick, Karen Franklin, people like that would come to the house. Dylan and Moira and...
Steve Johnston was answer the phone.
So I would... Yeah, we weren't paying people and they would come round after college. And so I would just be making pasta or salad or soup or...
So just hordes of students coming in and out.
Lots of people coming through.
Wow.
Dylan has a funny comment about my fridge, like that the fridge was always full. I'm a Jewish mum, what can I do?
It's the dream house. That sounds incredible.
And Terry would say things to me like, you're not to feed them too early because then they get tired and then they don't want to work. So I would and then I would be the one to chuck them out. Because
Amazing.
he would be working, he can work till 11 o'clock at night, not think about anything. And I'd go, Terry would go off to the loo or something, and I'd go, get your coats on, go.
But I mean, that kind of brings you on to, I think when everyone I've spoken to, when, I said I was chatting to the legends, Terry and Trisha, and everyone who either worked at Ideal, who's kind of worked within the industry, always talks about this idea of like cultivating and nurturing like talent. I mean, some of the names that have come through Idea it's the most successful people ultimately in the industry. So I've been trying to think about how you create or what you were looking for ultimately. I mean, I know you had obviously that relationship with St. Martin's in the way that you would look at a lot of their students, but how do you know how to spot talent? What was it about some of those names that you saw?
Usually, I didn't even find people when I'd go to college. People walk through the door.
Oh, so they came to you?
And then I'd give them a pencil. And so I wouldn't look at a CV. I was not interested in any qualifications. Most of the people who worked weren't trained in what they were doing. I mean, Steve Johnston had done a photographic course, but they were full of landscapes, and I'd just send him off down the King's Road to do head-to-toe portraits. Dylan came along with a photographer and hardly said a word, and I needed someone to take words. So he did the words. Karen came as a graphic student, and I mean, she remembers it better than me, but apparently I gave her a pair of scissors, said, cut up this bit of paper and stick it together, and I went off for 3 hours. So,
that's even more impressive.
But it is true that people, we didn't actually go out looking for people.
Right, okay.
People, there was definitely a certain point where people would come to us.
Sure.
But you would go to, you got asked to sort of judge things at, the Royal College and stuff. And
if I saw, I saw a lot of portfolios that would come in, but generally it would be just the vibe would feel right, or the personality would feel right.
Word of mouth.
And then they would be given something to do, and then like when Nick came, when he'd seen the Punk book, he was showing me the Skinheads before they were published.
Right.
I wanted to know if I was interested. I didn't like skinhead politics, so I said I wasn't, but I asked him to take pictures, which he did when he was at Bournemouth, so he did his student friends.
It is just, David Sims, Nick Knight,
David had been an assistant with a photographer who worked with Caroline Baker,
right, okay.
And I'd done a campaign, Robert Erdman, for an Italian company.
That was a way in, definitely. If people were someone's assistant, Terry would then say, can you do something?
Sure. Right.
So that was a way in.
Wow. So then you get to, and speaking of, and actually we've got it here, this was 1984, the Madonna, the Sex Sense issue. And I actually read a great thing about, was it W.H. Smith didn't want to stock it because they said it was too, the word sex was too salacious or something?
No, that was the other issue.
Well, no, it was. There was another. That was the Wolfgang Thomas. That got off tape on our shelf. We were distributed and worked really hard to get Smith to accept it. Right. And this was their first issue, which they agreed. And it happened to be themed on sex. Right. And also Mark Le Bon was the other key photographer who had a studio near Covent Garden. And I used to shoot a double page for Ferrucci for each issue as a kind of payback. And so Mark was shooting that, Karen was doing the styling, and Madonna had played at a Ferrucci party in Paris cut a few months before.
I thought it was up the road at Sheriff Road.
And no, when we did the cover, this one was shot in Covent Garden. Sade was shot at the top of the road.
Okay.
So, but both Sade and Madonna, their first cover was ID.
Yeah.
And
so did anyone know who Madonna was?
No. They thought it was Boy George's boyfriend.
Marilyn.
Really?
Yeah. Because she'd
That's
gone...
incredible.
A guy who had a hairdresser called Antenna in Kensington Church Street, Simon Forbes, I think he's called.
Right.
He just started doing hair extensions, and Boy George's boyfriend had got hair extensions, and Madonna was doing Top of the Pops and thought she should have hair extensions.
So good.
Ridiculous stories.
No, it's great.
It's so funny.
It's so good,
It's so funny.
But when she came into the studio...
where they're both at now.
Nobody knew who she was when she came in the studio. Karen took off... I only read about this recently, or Karen told me the story, that how she had this fishnet top. And
wasn't it like a Boy London mohair knit or something like that?
And so she took it off and gave her that. And then Mark was always really upset because I changed his pink background to a fluo background.
Right. But you did that a lot over the years.
Fluo backgrounds, I like fluorescent.
But more in terms of, I think it was like Dylan Jones who said he would have his words and you then suddenly just slice them at the bottom.
That was something.
Terry,
no, that was a really famous thing, and Dylan was
when was that?
It probably only happened once.
Oh, it probably only happened once.
I don't know.
But he still talks about it to this day.
Definitely. It could have happened more times, but it definitely was not something that Dylan. He's a very dear friend.
It was when the text got too long. Being a lazy reader, that's why we started with no journalism at all.
Yeah.
It was just like Q&A.
Yeah.
But and also the text we were doing in the early days was done on our Apple IIe computer. Wow. So we'd do our own printout. We didn't have the funds to do typesetting for a while, and then
it was always done on a shoestring.
And it was all pasted up to fit.
So impressive,
everything was physically pasted up on boards.
Wow.
I mean, digital planning, that was kind of, when we started, no one knew how to use a computer when we started doing that.
Except Robin, and then Robin came.
But no, that was kind of a Ferrucci thing, but later was at OMED.
Wolfgang actually had his film processed up the road at Snappy Snaps in
This is Wolfgang Tillmans.
Wolfgang Tillmans.
Well, the 1 Hour Lab was our kind of like that was our budget. So all the photographers, Takashi Homa, we would afford the 1 Hour Lab, and that was how we used to do multiple layouts. Because with Steve Mail, we just said, you get plenty of pictures, and then I'd encourage the photographers to get involved in layout.
At some point, you did have the thing down in the basement, didn't you?
That was right at the beginning, where we used to print everything to size.
Right.
And then we used to use the photocopy, before we had a photocopy, the people at the top of the road.
Impressive.
So I'd send Karen, up with the type, and then we'd do 3 sizes. And that's how we started doing double printing, because you'd never want to waste paper. So you'd then, and also run a photo through the machine twice. Yeah. So the layering on the photocopier. And then also colour separations on photocopier.
Of course.
Where you'd whip them out on the old Xeroxes, like so the back covers.
Sure. So good.
Like, the banknote project was all done on
wow. And we touched on this very briefly, and this is, I know he's a dear friend of your guys, and I had a call with him the other day. It was Simon Foxton, the legend.
Yeah. The legendary Simon. I adore him, yes.
He's incredible. I mean, I first crossed past him because he worked at Stone Island for, I want to say 15,
years and
20
years
maybe.
And years, absolutely.
But obviously he started at ID in 83, I want to say. Or was it a bit around then?
He appeared in an earlier issue,
Yeah.
And I think we featured his student collection, Karen with a friend, and
he was telling, was it Bazooka?
Bazooka,
yeah. He was telling me about it.
And then he before he was styling, Elio Ferrucci wanted to do a designer line, so he wanted a menswear and a women's wear, and so I introduced him to Vivian, and Simon then did this collection where he cut up old sweat stuff and
incredible
did a brilliant collection.
Because you touched on it very early, but this concept of the straight up. And that's what me and Simon were talking about on the phone the other day. Obviously, as you both said, that street photography, street style photography didn't exist. But obviously, for like my generation, it's what someone would call like a fit pic or a look, you know, something that obviously appears on social media. But it's mad to think that was, the straight up was ultimately a term that was coined by you. I mean, that's just...
Well, it's actually from, Bristolian is College of Bristolian.
I think it's you, Terry.
If someone was saying the truth, they'd say, straight up.
Okay, got you. Okay.
Straight up was like, it's kind of like straight and on. Yeah. So when we did the first Head to Toes, it was because Steve would go down the King's Road originally and ask someone to take the picture, and they only would expect one click. And I'd give him a roll of film, and I said, okay, that's a roll of 36. You're going to come back with at least 16 shots.
Sure.
And he would, there would be 20, because he might do 2 clicks, but mostly one shot. So the idea of the one shot is kind of what I would be encouraging.
Okay.
If I were to do a theme now, I would probably say it's a one shot, and you'd ask people just do one shot on their iPhone and put.
So that's why it appealed to you, because it was literally you have one opportunity and you want to capture ultimately the whole outfit.
And Terry often used to say after a shoot that sometimes he'd be going through a lot of stuff. I mean, this is not to do with ID. This is like advertising stuff.
Yeah.
And often, sometimes, occasionally, the first one would be the best. You would sometimes say that.
First or last.
Yeah.
First or last.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I mean, the first issue of ID Japan, and
what year was that? Sorry?
91, I think.
Okay.
And I'd met Takashi Homa before, and he was my choice of photographer to do the Japanese Madonna, which was a lady called Kyung Kyung.
Fantastic.
And I'd asked the stylist to produce a red wig that was kind of 3 foot tall. And then at the shoot, her management turned up, and there were like many more people than here.
Yeah.
And he did it first shot, and I said, that's the cover.
Wow.
And he said, but no, they expect... So he shot rolls of film, but it was the first shot.
First shot. Incredible. Another thing that always crops up when I feel people talk about ideas, this idea of the family element. I mean, I think there's a great... there's a great thing in, I think it's in Soul ID, Trish, where someone talks about the multi-generational talented tribe. And also, I think it's your son, Matt, says, biological or non-biological family is the best thing in the world, which I think is such a sweet quote. But how do you create a company or a publication where everyone is obsessed with like winning and everyone wants to work for creating that environment?
I don't think it's to do with winning.
Okay, not winning, sorry. It's probably badly put, yeah.
I think that, I mean, one of the things people used to ask me, how many people in the team? And I could never manage more than 20. And actually, our normal number was about 18, probably including us.
That was the staff in the office.
You know,
right.
But so that was, but you're talking about how do you, and I think that was sort of, there was a whole thing in the office. I was the goody two-shoes. I used to be a teacher. I was a mum.
Okay.
And there were certain behaviour things that we kind of insisted on.
Sure.
So I insisted on. So no one was allowed to slam doors. No one was allowed to shout. There were, if you got in, there were certain rules, in inverted commas, that kind of made it, I suppose, feel more family, because I couldn't manage more people than that. So we would try and feed people. We would make sure that they were on Bupa and things like that after they'd worked with us for a while. So I think that feeling of looking after people kind of created that without us even trying.
Completely.
Do you know
understand.
What I mean?
Wow.
Does that make sense?
No, very much so. So it felt very organic because everyone was looking out for one another.
Well,
you almost wanted
to. These things always go from the top. So, and one of the things I used to say to Terry, we'd drive home. I mean, this was long after it was in our house. It was when we were partnering with Tony. And I'd say, he'd say, someone did really well today. And I was like, did you tell them? And he went, well, no, they know. And I'm like, no, hang on. You've got to tell people.
Yeah, so people
it's that thing that people tend to say the bad things, or like, can you do this? But, I mean, he's really kind to everyone.
Telepathy was meant to be one of the on the job spec.
They're meant to know that they've done well, and I'm like, no, that's not true.
But also the other thing, the team in the office were like the kitchen, but the ingredients came from the outside. So like any good kitchen, you're dependent on your suppliers. And so I would just ask people to exceed, well, I didn't ask, but I expected them to exceed their own expectations. So that was the kind of principle.
So that's how you create that environment.
And so...
It was a bit of a football team in that he didn't really like people working for him.
Yeah, early days, when face and idea was going to look
I get
thing.
That, though.
But after a while, it's
not that we didn't
it's
like
how you
Nick.
chop
we
it
great
together.
Respect for Nick.
Sure.
No, I mean, Nick was really good. But I think that the other thing was that the principle of the design was very hands-on. So when Moira came on board first and Steve Mail, they were like a team for many years. And so the idea was that the pages early on were like artworks. And so you'd slow the reader down by layering. The idea that you didn't do things fast feed and that you would discover things after 3 months that you hadn't noticed.
That's so nicely put. That's really nice. Trish, back to Soul ID, because I love that book so much. I want to know how it was, how it was masterminded, like how the kind of idea, because it was a few.
There are four books
within.
And then there were 2 sections that were in the magazine.
Yes,
and it was never planned as a whole. It never was. So basically it was, I'm a teacher, and I think the idea of coming up to the millennium, to be even alive in the year 2000 seems so enormous to me. And we always used to have a theme for the issue. And I just said to Terry I don't know, I have ideas in the shower, I'm a morning person. I just said, I'd really love to, we do themes on the issues. I'd love to do something around family because we're coming up to the millennium in a year or two. What is people's support system? Families are so different, do you know what I mean? And right, I wanted it to be very much, what does family mean to you? And in fact, that first one, Terry was kind of a little bit more involved, and he briefed people as to what he wanted.
Well, we did a fashion, about 2 or 3 things which were still fashion-led.
They were fashion stories.
But it was a mistake.
It wasn't what I would have done. And when they came in, he wanted to use them. And I was like, well, that's fine. But actually, I don't want to do this again. If we're going to do it, it's going to be kind of, this is how I want it to be.
Follow it beyond pride.
Then we didn't know. I had no idea. I did family for that reason. And in fact, people were like, I think it was a bit of an odd concept at the time, family, future positive. I think someone said you can't just call it family because that sounds like the Italian mafia. And family, future positive. Sure. And then it was really successful and people really loved it. And
because it's the outpour of love. Like, from everyone there's so many people, but for me, the name, because I was looking through it recently and, you've even got Robert Dreyfus in there and Cal, you've got Carlo and Sabina, you've got Yoji. I mean, you've got you guys, you've got your children. But it's incredible.
Okay, so it's really simple. People needed to understand. I was incredibly lucky. We had such amazing contributors, and it was really nice to be able to offer people something apart from fashion or frocks or money or anything. So they were just like kind of ideas in the shower,
So it's a breath of fresh air in that sense. And the thing I haven't asked you guys about, which I feel is I feel some people still don't know this, but the ID wink.
He can tell you.
I'm so intrigued by that because you were telling me, Terry, that was it David? Like you were saying for years.
I told you.
He didn't clock that. Can you talk through
David
the
LaChapelle,
ID
when we
wink?
showed him, and he did it on a napkin. We were in a restaurant somewhere, I don't know where, and you were talking to David, and David said, "What's this thing about the wink and the logo?" And you drew it on a napkin. I remember that.
Well,
I don't know where we were.
Yeah,
so sweet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's various reasons. Growing, being a student in the 60s, you play around with your initials, you play around with doing logo idents. And Instant Design was our company. And I called myself an informat designer. So I&D was something I played around with years. And then when Al and I would just it was actually just Al and I. He had his studio in Berwick Street at the time, trying to figure out what we wanted to call it. And then we had two baths.
We had 2 baths in our bathroom in London.
That's our kind of boardroom.
And he was...
Is this in Hampstead?
In Hampstead,
So we had
what, side by side?
Facing,
bath,
they're facing.
No. So 1 bath here, 1 bath there.
That sounds like
with
a
our
dream.
taps.
Incredible.
Yeah, you could play flannel tennis.
No, what happened was that when we moved into Sheriff Road, it was a typical Victorian terraced house.
Right.
And we had a tiny bathroom. But it was kind of a chatting time. So I would have a bath and I'd say, T, come and talk to me.
Yeah.
And he'd bring
That's
a
so
chair
special.
in and talk to me. And then at some point we thought, well, actually we just basically put the 2 rooms together. And then we had 2 bars, so taps
Facing
were in
each
the
other.
middle. So you sit at this, and people say, why didn't you have a shared bath? It's not the same. I want to be able to
You
wash
want your
my
own-
hair and,
yeah,
excuse
you want your own
me.
space. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Terry's head at this end, my head at that end. And one particular morning,
So
I don't know whether it was because we're morning people in baths and showers. And he was going through a list of, he was saying, I need a title for the new magazine. And I don't know, I can't tell you the other ones he gave me, but ID was one of them. And when he got to ID, I was like, that's the one.
that was the one.
Yeah. Blah, blah.
And then, when you put the 2 together, and also with the badge that we produced with the first issue, we used to have a thing seen in and then the ID logo. And immediately people would wear the button and see it was a smiling face. And so they were the kind of walking advert for the magazine.
Incredible.
And so we kept it like that graphically until we had Lady Di on the first cover. I did as a collaboration with Malcolm Garrett, and I got a picture of her, and then I stole a wink from an ad from someone else. It wasn't her wink, stuck it on, and then it went from there.
Yeah, because I even actually, going back to the Madonna issue, she wasn't able to wink with the
she was having
correct eye,
problems.
so you had to flip the image.
She was having problems with the right eye.
Because what is it? It's the
Right eye.
eye.
The right eye is the right eye.
Yeah, that's the one.
And also
I can't wink at all.
models would kind of practice because they wanted to be on a cover.
so
Of course they do it
This
in-
is really true.
And they'd be in the mirror, but of course in the mirror you're doing the wrong way around.
That's so good.
But yeah, over the years, I mean, what was amazing is that Takashi got these 2 girls winking together.
Yeah.
Which, it's getting the classic
classic.
was Tom Ford.
This is
and
the
the
funniest.
deal there was that
Was that with his dog?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. But the deal was that if the dog winked, he could get a cover. And
This was a crazy thing because Terry started putting designers on the cover, and I did warn him. I was like, this is not a good idea because it's going to cause such problems.
Everyone's like, Terry and Trisha, we need a cover.
No. It was a
it did
real
get to
hassle.
that.
Yeah.
And it did, he got away with it a lot of times, but it did cause us problems
well,
with
Mr.
Dolce
Armani.
Dolce.
Oh yeah, the Dolce Gabbana
Dolce
separately.
Gabbana.
Yeah, they shot a cover. We didn't run, but the bigger problem was that the Tom Ford came out when we were taking the Smile exhibition from London into his new store in Milan.
Huge
And that was
Armani
when
store,
early
Via-
2000?
Via Manzoni, the huge...
Yeah, 2001. And it was the month that the Tom Ford cover was out. So we held it back
when he
for
was
2
at
weeks.
Gucci.
Wow.
And then when he saw
Was
it,
it-
he
was
dropped his sponsorship.
Yeah, no, it was actually really serious. We tried to hold it. It was completely stupid
Well, I was
of
going to
us.
say,
Yeah.
Completely
But then
stupid.
then Renzo Rosso reached out and he picked it up for it travelled then, went to Japan, it went to through South America, travelled and then finally the last place was Moscow.
wow. And that was the same with Soul ID. That also, there were multiple
Similar
exhibitions. weren't there?
Yes,
issues. Yeah.
absolutely.
And it started in Paris?
The first one should have been in Beijing.
Yes.
And
No,
then
the first one was Paris.
excuse me.
Oh,
it
you
should
went to-
have been.
You're right.
Trish, tell me
should-
about the Beijing
I
story.
told him this story and he didn't know it.
That's good.
Okay, so it's a bit complicated. I'll do it as briefly as I can.
Yeah.
We were in China for one of Terry's one of the ID exhibitions.
Identity.
And Fed Tan was working with Diesel at the time, and Diesel were one of the sponsors.
Yeah.
And Fed is brilliant, and it was 2 years before the Olympics, and I was just like, I used to wear Diesel jeans, and I really liked Renzo and Antonella, and we were just chatting, and because we were there a few days, and I just had this idea. I'm like, we've got this project. You know, I've been working on these books, and you know how we had sort of like Smile ID? I guess I could put it together maybe and do something like Soul ID, because you've got the Olympics coming, and it's all about youngs and sport and excellence. But I've got something that is actually, it's very different, but it could be really, it could be really interesting. And he said, "Oh, that sounds a good idea." And we didn't really talk any more about it. And then I can't remember how long afterwards, but I was in the office and I was talking to him. He was in China and Hong Kong, wherever it was. And I said, "Are you?" I don't know which of us asked. I think it was me saying, "Are you still interested?" And he said, "Yes." So then we actually started talking about it seriously. And what happened was that they managed to get a new museum called the Today Museum to take, if I could get the project together, they would take it as their opening exhibition during the Olympics. Fantastic. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing. That's fantastic. So then we had worked with Benedict on the Smile book.
Benedict Taschen.
Benedict Taschen, sorry. Yeah. And so we had an exhibition space. And so we went to Benedict and we had lunch with him in Paris one day. It just happened that we were all there together. And I gave him the idea. I said, "Look, we've got an exhibition space during the Olympics. It's going to happen in a year's time. Could I put it together as a book?" So Benedict literally over lunch said yes. I didn't have... You don't have to, when you're working with someone like Benedict, you don't have to go through, well, I've got to ask this one and this one and this one and this one. And they all put their spoke in. He just said yes, and that was it. Yeah. So we then had a book in planning, and we had a space. We had the Today Museum. So then I was able to go around to the people who'd supported us in the past, because we never had the money for these things. And I was always quite very arsey. And I used to say to people, if you support it, you can't put in an ordinary advert. You've got to make an ad for us specially, for each of the sections that we were doing at that time, each of the books we were doing. So that was a kind of a big commitment in those days, to have to sort of do a special ad just for us. So then I went to everybody who'd supported, and they were all like, yes, 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 we're going to do it. And then literally the month before the Olympics, the Chinese government started getting very, very antsy about anything to do with the Dalai Lama. It was in the news. It was everywhere.
Sure.
And, sorry?
Yeah, the whole thing with Tibet.
Yes. And so I suddenly said to Terry one day, we've got a contribution from the Dalai Lama, and what do I do? So I phoned Fed up, and I said, Fed, I'm really sorry, but, we do have you realised? And I don't think he'd actually hadn't made the connection at that time. And he very sweetly, and I love Fed, he said, could you leave it out? I said, no, I can't possibly.
Not possible.
So then it was like, oh, shit, what do we do? And actually then they did pull the exhibition. They felt that they couldn't open the exhibition because I wouldn't take it out, and I wasn't prepared to drop it. So then I had to go to Benedict and say, Benedict, what do we do? If he'd have asked me to drop it, I would actually have had to do it. I would have done for him. But he was completely amazing. And he said, well, actually, we're meant to be printing in a month's time on mainland China. I can change it to Hong Kong and you'll still get your book published. And I was like,
incredible.
Thank you so much.
So you had the book, but obviously not
I had
exhibition,
the book and not the exhibition.
It was then 2 years later.
2 years later.
That it was Paris.
I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, it was Azadine.
We were in Paris, and we were being shown around Azadine's space by whoever that lovely woman was who... Was she Caroline?
Caroline,
right. Somebody. And she showed us, so we were in the shop and we saw the workroom and everything. And then she said, oh, and we've got this gallery space. And I looked at her and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it wasn't, it's not a huge space. We had much bigger spaces afterwards. I said, oh, you've got a gallery space. Well, we've got an exhibition that has never found a home. And that was it.
I've seen, I think, Terry, you showed me some of those images from that. It's such a beautiful space.
But then
what's
the other
that
thing,
kind of, isn't there like a curving?
That was Terry's idea. So it's the eye. So basically, it's the eye.
Yeah.
And
that was a chance photo that was done by...
I'll get his name in a moment.
Yeah.
So the eye was my image.
He saw it in a cloud, and Trish said that's the cover.
Well, Terry was trying to think of what could be the cover for the Soul book.
Yeah.
And I just said, we've got it. We don't need to shoot it. We've got the cover. And I knew exactly what the image should be.
Beautiful, like blue
Yeah,
kind of hue with
it was a cloud, and it was...
Derek.
We'll find out for you.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many names, you guys. The recall's incredible in itself.
No, Derek was a great contributor. He did the whole story for the family with the dogs. He had this dog that used to come in the office.
Is that Derek's son?
Not Derek Santini.
No. Who shot the English Bull Terrier, Turk, on the cover? Was that Derek?
Derek.
Yeah. And then you've got Alexander McQueen with his Bull Terrier. And
McQueen, basically, his dog had loads of puppies.
Was it Derek Santini who did the cloud?
Yeah.
It was he did the cloud as well.
Wow.
And so that became the dog family, which was all those people that were featured in the family.
Yeah, I love that.
But the other thing about that particular night was I told you that we were at Azzadine's, we were putting up the exhibition, and it was the night of the election in America. And we were all... So Terry, myself, and a guy called John Pearson, who helped me with the book, we're all putting it up, and we're there. We were staying at Azzadine's place, and we're watching, and it was the night Obama got elected, and we were like, oh, my God. And so the next morning, we made a poster. I can't even remember, but we went out and got a poster, which we put up, because it was like,
brilliant.
you know, now it's such a really scary moment, and this was like, honestly, this was like, just amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
It felt like the wall had come down. We had Obama there and Michelle. I mean, it was just fantastic. So
amazing.
There you are.
And one of the final things I want to ask you guys about, and it's kind of, I guess it references the space we're in right now, but would you call this the ID archive? Or is it an archive as such?
To me, it's a kind of living archive.
It's a living archive, right.
It's like a work in progress that should continue.
Fantastic.
And the ideal dream is to have it as a resource.
Got you.
And I was talking to Matt, our son, he was with us yesterday.
Sure.
And he's always been freaked out by the amount of stuff because I didn't throw it away.
There is a lot of stuff.
It's daunting.
And, you know, he suddenly realised that actually, as you see the disappearance of paper, you know, print, all of that's going. The next generation of photographers are interested in analog. Everything digital looks the same. You're about to have AI take everyone's job. You know, the things that...
there is that huge bust having the physical artifact in your hand.
And it'll come back to, you know, okay, what can we do? We talked to a gardener, you know, gardening is something that AI will never take over.
Yeah.
Cooking, hopefully the same. So I think that having something which is a dream in your head, then teaching people when the power's gone down, you only have to see the news to realise that we're all vulnerable, but no one can live without their mobile phone at the moment.
Yeah.
I think every school should have a day a week they switch off the power so people start communicating.
Completely agree, yeah.
But the other thing was, when you asked about how do we think about this space, when we first saw it and wanted to take it, you know, we're paying like 15 grand a year, which is nothing compared for London, absolutely nothing.
It's 2 months in London.
Susan, our bookkeeper, said to us, said to Terry, will it make money? Because obviously we had to say to her, Susan, we want to take this space on.
Of course, yeah.
And I said no. I said, no, absolutely not. It's a place for Terry to play. That was exactly what I said to her. And Terry said, well, it might one day in the future. But I really wanted him to be able to... We chased deadlines and finances for so long. I wanted him to have somewhere that he could play.
Yes.
And that's, you know, these artworks, these collages, these autobiographical collages that he's been making these last few years, I adore. I absolutely love them.
They're incredible, yeah. Terry's shown them about
I love them.
Yeah.
I mean, I might be biased, and I know a lot of other people are doing collages now, but he literally started it when we had the space.
Yeah.
So for me, that was, you know, and if an exhibition comes out of this or something else, it would be amazing. But that was the starting point. It was actually for Terry to play.
Incredible.
Well, I think it's also a recognition of the amount of energy and time that contributors put in, and it's their story. You know, for me, connections of that. And I think that that's what's interesting, is where you see people like Edward or Wolfgang at the beginning of their careers, and then it takes
where
off.
They are now.
And I'm forever grateful. You know, Mark LeBon and Nick were two different schools at the same time, and all the people that came through them. You know, Maris Testino, Sorrenti rather, Maris Sorrenti from Mark, or you know, Jason Evans.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Jason Evans, that shoot he did with Simon and Edward. It's incredible.
And then, just people who call up from places, you know, anywhere in the world and contribute. So it became a global thing.
It's so powerful. The very final thing I want to ask you,
you keep saying that.
No, I know. Sorry, this is the very last one. I'm longing it out too much. And I think I might already know the answer to this, but if you both of you could go back in time to any party or event, which one would it be, and what would you be wearing? I think I know the answer to the latter in terms of what you'd be wearing.
Okay, as an event,
yes.
Nothing to do with what we put on.
No,
okay.
anything at all.
Okay,
yeah.
For me, Dries Van Noten did a fashion show in Paris where he put... It was a dinner,
right?
And we were all. It was the most. I adored Reese and Patrick, his partner, and they laid the tables. I don't know how many people we were. 100. I mean, huge.
As long as this space.
It was probably from here to
maybe
there.
Longer.
And
I think there was 100 guests.
I don't know. Anyhow, there were places we were told where to sit, and it was a dinner. So we were invited for a dinner, but there were chandeliers. It was so immaculately done. And so the dinner turns up, and everybody had a waiter behind them, and everything came, you know, you got your plate, and it was all amazing.
Yeah.
And then at some point, and I think it was between, I can't remember at what point, but at some point the chandeliers lifted up, and the girls walked along the catwalk of the table. I swear to God.
What year is this?
I don't know.
Can't remember.
I'm going to be deep dive.
You're looking
digging
into
into
it was
wow.
For me, that was really. I mean, I will. You know.
What were you? What?
I have no idea what I
don't know,
probably something black. You know, as Terry said, I've often gone for guys' clothes. So you know, Ralph Simmons,
sure.
Rick Owens, people like that. But Yoshi a lot.
Amazing. And Terry, you?
Julia as well.
The Florence ID Now, this issue was amazing, because the idea that I'd pitched...
It was terrifying.
It was a one-night party in a Palazzo Corsini where they have frescoes that you're not allowed to touch.
Incredible.
So I came up with the idea of scaffolding, and that we would hang everything like sheets. And we were shooting and making the exhibition with my work table and two really good assistants. And we prepared Takashi Homer was one, Mark LeBon was the other photographer, Wolfgang was still a student, he and Kate were using a little digital camera, and we had a party while we were making the exhibition.
It was terrifying, and I'm telling
you. During the install?
We were creating the exhibition while the party was going on.
It was unbelievable. How we pulled it off, I don't know.
We had DJs from Tresor were playing in one room, where we had a live feed to a screen which was Save the World by Catching Bombs. We had the night went on, and they couldn't get rid of the Italians that normally walked in and walked out, and that was an event. And then we did a similar thing in Paris.
Only one. You're only allowed one. You've done really well.
So
this idea of doing a party and actually creating an exhibition on a night was madness.
So you're filming and then printing it and then putting it on the wall all during the time of the party.
Going on.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, would you have been wearing exactly the same thing?
Yeah, it was
beautiful.
Possibly.
Yeah. That was
this is very new. This is probably much newer than he should be wearing, but
this
it hasn't
is from
been
the Free
washed
Market
enough.
2 weeks ago. But yeah, it would have been one of those, and
he doesn't do suits.
Converse, okay, nice. I love that in life, just having a uniform that works well, that's versatile.
Who told me that? was it Richard Buckley, who I adore, who's not here anymore, but Richard told me that, I think it was Tom, also had a number of sort of, you have the same things. Well, in the fashion industry, it's different now, but back in the day, if you wore black, you get away with anything, except that people would stare at my feet because I always wore Converse as well. And certainly, everyone was wearing their Manolas or something, and they'd be looking. I once saw, we were walking to a Prada show, and I once saw some people, like a couple of women on the other side of this small road going to Prada, and they're like,
changing their shoes.
Look at her.
In her Converse.
Back in the day.
Incredible. Right. Terry and Josh, I could actually talk to both of you forever. And I feel like, hopefully you'd let me sit down and talk to you guys again, because there's endless stories, and I'm so in awe of what you guys have achieved, and it gives me motivation to work harder and build something of such an incredible legacy. So thank you so much.
It's a lot of people's stories. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, and all you guys, and a special thank you to Robert, because without Robert
and Sabina
and Carlo, we wouldn't, we don't normally do things like podcasts.
They were such major supporters.
And they've been massive in different ways. Sabina and Carlo in one way, and Robert
they're the best
in another. And so
I always feel like Sabina and Carlo are my Italian parents.
But that's how we were introduced to them. My friend Beth Summers said, "Oh, by the way, when you go to Milan, you should meet Sabina and Carlo, because they're like the Milanese Terry and Trisha."
Sure. And
She and I have the same birthday. She's younger than me, but we have the same birthday. So there you are.
Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Guys.